Welcome, Salvati Civis, and welcome to Coram Sedorum Sanguinis, or Blood, Sweat and Horses. My name's Andy Nash, the creator and co-designer of the game, and I'm going to show you how to play. The game is for 3 to 6 players, aged 14 and over, and is based loosely on the ancient Roman chariot races that dominated the arenas of the most powerful empire of that age. The object of the game is to complete 2 laps of the track and cross the finish line ahead of the other competitors. Players can run a straight race, speeding away from their opponents and try to navigate the corners at high speeds and prevent their chariots from crumbling to pieces from under them. Alternatively, they can fight their way to victory, attacking their opponents using special attacks to damage and slow them down. Or why not try a combination of both? Let's have a look at the setup. The game is played on a circular track that can be printed out to whatever size you would like. I printed out on A3 and glued it to blue foam to provide some substance. A larger print of A2 can be printed out on 6 A4 sheets, giving you a larger footprint to place your tokens on. But for this video, I'll be using a custom board that I built out of blue foam. This is a nice 3D representation that gives you an idea of the theme and keeps the game nice and fun to play. So each player takes a player board coloured to the corresponding chariot that they wish to have represent them in the race. You can use tokens or even chariot meeples. I'll be using these 10mm chariot miniatures that I got from Irregular Miniatures. The players also take a corresponding coloured priority token, which is slightly large, and 2 coloured nibs to match their team colours. On the player board, you need to put the first nib on the speed track at the top here at level 2, and the second nib on the damage track there, just before the 1. The priority token will be taken and shown on the main board. Players then take a set of activation cards. I've had these made up. The set is 16 cards, and each turn the player will shuffle the deck, deal themselves 6 face down, and then in secret choose 4 of the cards that they're going to use in that turn. But we'll talk about that more later on in the video. On the main board, each player's priority token is placed into a cup or a bag and drawn randomly to fill the priority tracker. The first player drawn goes into the first slot, in this case the white, followed by the second, third, 4th, 5th and 6th spots until all of the players have been drawn and placed into the priority tracker, starting at I down to VI in Roman numerals. Then take each player's chariot and, starting with the outermost lane, place the chariots belonging to the players in priority order until the players lowest down are placed in the innermost lane, lane 1. So for example, in this particular case, white is the priority player, so their chariot goes into lane 1, in lane 6, I beg your pardon. The red is next, and they go into lane 5, followed by blue, purple, green and gold. Once that's done, take the event cards, give them a shuffle, place them on the draw pile, and take 5 cards out, placing them to form an event deck. The event deck is numbered between 1 and 5, and that is the value of the event cards when purchased using event points. But we'll talk more about that later on in the video, and that's the setup. The turn is broken down into 3 phases. The priority phase, followed by the planning phase, followed by the execution phase. In the priority phase, the order of the players is determined, although this can change due to certain circumstances and actions, such as distract and the like. If a player is returning from the pits, then they are returned to the priority tracker at this point in the game. But pit stops will be covered later on in this video. In the planning phase, each player takes their pack of 16 activation cards and shuffles them. Deals themselves 6 cards face down. And then chooses 4 in secret. The player then decides which order they wish to play the cards, placing them on their player board under the numbers shown here. If a chariot has damage to it, it may lose an activation or 2. This is shown in the numbers under the damage track. These damage tracks are referred to as damage bands. If the amount of damage taken by a chariot means they move from one band to another, i.e. from damage 4 to damage 5, then the number of activations available to the player is reduced, in this case from 4 down to 3. In which case, the player must cover the card in a slot with a blank. If the damage went from 8 to 9, they would only have 2 activations available and would cover 2 slots with a blank. The execution phase is played out by completing each player's activation card in slot 1 in priority order. The cards are revealed simultaneously but played in that priority order. The exception being if a player has used a distract action where they will choose one of the 3 options to disrupt their opponent's plans. If more than one player has used a distract action, then the player who is in the highest in the priority tracker uses their distract first. Each player takes their action as shown in their card at the beginning, i.e. before moving, or the end, i.e. after moving, of that activation round. They cannot take the action in the middle of moving. During that round, the player will move their chariot the number of spaces shown on their speed track. The player's chariot will always move a minimum of 1 square, representing the perpetual movement of these machines, unless, of course, the chariot has taken its maximum damage, in which case it stops and becomes an obstacle. Various actions available to be used during their players' rounds. The first is speed. This card allows a player to adjust their speed track by up to 2 spaces. So for example, this is on 2, the player may go up to speed track 4, if he so chooses to 3, or down to 1. Remember that the minimum speed is always 1 unless the chariot has been damaged. Next is change lane. Change lane is a special card. It allows the player to move from one current lane that they currently occupy to the one adjacent to it, either to the left or the right. Alternatively, the player can adjust their speed track by 1 space, in this case either down to 1 or up to 3. The attack card gives the player the chance to damage an opponent's chariot in an effort to slow it down. The attack can be made in any direction, and the range is counted from space next to the attacker to the space that includes the target, counting firstly across to the target lane if necessary, and then toward the target. Don't forget to include the space that the target sits on. Do not count any squares diagonally. You must go first to the adjacent lanes if necessary, and then backwards or forwards towards the target. Once range has been determined, find the range on the attack chart on the player board. The number shown is what is required as a D6 in order to pass the test. For example, if the target was 2 squares away, it would require a 3+ on the roll of a D6 in order to pass the target test. If the target is 6 or more spaces away from the attacker, that attack has failed automatically, the maximum target being 5 squares and 6+ on the dice. If a player is successful in their attack, then their opponent adds 1 point of damage to their chariot. Finally, if the attack is successful, then the player who made the attack adds 2 event points to their player board. But more on that later on. We determine range as follows. If the red chariot was attacking the blue chariot, we would calculate range as follows. Count the square next to the red chariot and the square that the blue chariot, the target, is currently sitting in. In this particular case, it would be 2 squares. If, for example, the blue chariot was in this square, the range would be calculated as follows. The space next to the red chariot, 1, 2, 3, 4, including the space that the blue chariot is occupying for 4 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4. If the blue chariot was in this square, we would calculate the range as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the blue chariot would be out of range, meaning that the red chariot would be unable to attack that chariot. Shield actions force an opponent who has declared that they are attacking you to roll on the shield chart instead of the attack chart. This makes it more difficult to successfully attack your chariot and reduces the effective range. If an opponent declares an attack on your chariot and you have a shield activation card in play that round, you gain 2 experience points. No matter what, even if the attack is successful or not, the very fact that you've put your shield up means that you get 2 event points. In this particular example, we've gone from 2 event points for our successful attack to 4 for our successful shield. The repair action is a relatively simple one and allows you to reduce your damage track by up to 2 points. This is an immediate effect and can mean unlocking activation cards that were previously blocked due to damage. For example, this chariot would go from 2 down to fully repaired. If the chariot's damage track was on 5, and would mean that the normally would only play 3 activations out of the 4, and he successfully repaired down to 3, he would gain an activation. The favour action represents luck from the gods. The favour card means that the player can add 1 favour to their player board. Favours can be exchanged at any time in a player's activation, although in the case of shield it can be played in an opponent's activation. 1 favour can be exchanged to add +1 to the dice when rolling an attack, or add an additional point of damage to an opponent, or make it difficult to be attacked when shielded by one. The decision to exchange the favour for an advantage must be made before any dice are rolled, however. 2 favours can be exchanged for a repair action. Or if you had 2 favours, you could alter 2 dice rolls when attacking an opponent, one to make it easier to attack and one to add an extra damage point to your opponent. 3 favours can be used to place an obstacle on the board. This is using the rules that I'll go through later on. The last action is a distract action. This action is played slightly differently to the others in that it is played out of the priority order. The player chooses one of 3 actions. They can either cause a rival player to lose an action, meaning they will only move and cannot play the action that is written on their card, or they can cause a rival player to lose a point of speed. This is marked on their speed track. Or it can be used to change their own position in the priority tracker by 1 place. This effect is immediate and again is played out of the priority order. If more than 1 player has a distract card, then the priority order is used, with the person highest in the priority order going first and using their distract first, followed by the second player, and so on. Remember, a chariot will always move the number of spaces indicated on its speed track each activation, whether the player has been able to take an action or not, and the action can be taken before or after the movement, but not during. If a chariot spends any part of its activation round in a space on a corner section of the track, the start of which and the finish of which are marked by these lane modifiers here, then it's required to take a cornering test. The test must be taken at the end of the movement if the chariot finishes movement on the corner, or at the first space on a straight section. If the result of the test is a 0, then all is well. If not, then apply the result at this point and any subsequent penalties before completing any remaining moves if appropriate. To make a cornering test, the player must determine the total modifier. To make a cornering test then, firstly determine that total modifier. First find the relevant turn modifier under the player's current speed. In this example, the player's current speed is 6, attracting a -2 modifier. Then find the lane modifier shown here on the track. This must be the lane that the player has spent the majority of the activation in. For example, if the chariot was in lane 5 for its movement and then used a change lane card to switch to lane 6, it would take its cornering test at lane 5, where it spent the majority of its time. In this case, it would attract a +1 modifier. Add the 2 modifiers together, the turn modifier and the lane modifier. In this example, the 2 together would make -1. That's a total modifier of -1. Looking up the total modifier on the top of the chart, find the relevant column and then roll a d6. Find the result down the left hand side and then cross-reference the number to find the total number of damage points taken by the chariot. For example, if a 5 was rolled on the d6, we would look down the left hand side and cross-reference it to find that 0 damage points had been taken. the turn has been a success. If, however, the speed was at speed 8 and therefore a turn modifier of -4, and the chariot was in the lane 6, which attracts a -3 modifier, this is a total modifier of -7. Whatever our player rolls, damage is going to occur. Punishment for his reckless behaviour. If the D6 roll was again a 5, take the -7 and cross-reference it with a 5 to show 6. The 6 on the chart represents the amount of damage that the chariot receives, and the player must adjust the damage track accordingly. In this example, the player goes from 0 damage to 6 and subsequently moves into the next damage band. This causes him to lose an activation, and he must cover up his next activation with a blank. In subsequent turns, he will be able to cover any of the cards as normal. Obstacles can appear for various reasons. At the cost of 3 favour points, a player can place an obstacle at any time at the start of their activation, anywhere on the track, as long as it is no closer than 1 square to any chariot, or 3 squares from any other obstacle. This is a free action caused by giving the favours. If a chariot sustains damage that would reduce it to 0, the chariot immediately becomes an obstacle in the square at the end of their move. They remain an obstacle until they have finished pit stopping, and we'll talk about pit stopping later on in the video. When the first player crosses over the start-finish line, the player furthest back may place an obstacle anywhere on the track, as long as it's no closer than 1 square to any chariot or 3 squares to any other obstacle. If a chariot crashes into an obstacle at some point in its movement, then it will take damage. Move the player's damage marker up the track until it enters another damage band. In this particular example, from 0 to 5. This will come into effect immediately, as you will always lose an activation card, and you must cover the next available action. Note that if the player had been on damage 3, it would still only move to the next damage band. This is a variable damage effect and not a fixed set. So once again, that would cause an activation to be lost and a card to be covered. Collisions. If a chariot is forced to collide with another chariot for whatever reason, then it immediately stops moving and loses any remaining moves. If it has a higher speed, then it must reduce its speed to that of the chariot that it hit. For example, if the red chariot was moving at speed 3 and the blue chariot had moved speed 4, then the blue chariot must reduce its speed to match that of the chariot that it hit, i.e. down to speed 3. Pit stops. When a chariot reaches 12 damage points, it stops and becomes an obstacle. In this example, the chariot is moving speed 3, encounters an obstacle, which is resolved immediately, to make him damage 12. This has the effect of becoming an obstacle following the remaining of his moves. This rule supersedes the previous obstacle placement rules in that it can be placed wherever it is finished. The crew immediately attempt repairs to their machine, aided by their pit crew. Unlike modern Grand Prix, the repairs are made on the track, but are still considered pit stops. To resolve a pit stop, place your priority marker in the left-hand slot of the first available pit. In this case, we're going to use Primus, and we're going to place our priority tracker in the left-hand slot marked I. Place the speed track marker to 1. This is despite the fact that the chariot at this point is immobilised. And then add a single favour to your board. Everybody loves that loser. Finally, cover the remaining activations with blanks. At the end of each subsequent activation round, you can return your priority marker to the gap that's highest in the priority tracker. You would then move your damage counter to the lowest number in the damage band marked 2. In this case it's 9. You're then ready to go once you've uncovered 2 activations based on the cards available to you in that damage band. Alternatively, if you wish to remain longer in the pits, move your token down to the slot number 2. Following the end of subsequent activation rounds, you can either rejoin the priority tracker in the gap that's left, then move down to the lowest number in the next band. In this case, you would go on to damage marker 5. You would add another favour as the crowd starts to get behind you, and you would be able to reveal 3 activations. This is the band that you would now inhabit. If, for example, you did not want to do that and you wanted to wait a 3rd turn, you would wait till the end of the subsequent activations phase, i.e. the 3rd activation missed, then replace your token in the priority tracker, add a 3rd and final favour, and move your damage tracker to the undamaged part of the board. This would reveal your 4th and final activation. You would then be ready to rejoin the race. Finally, we have the event points and cards. Event points are generated by certain actions and can be exchanged for cards in order to gain an advantage over your rivals. The number underneath each card is the number of event points that need to be exchanged for that card at that time. These values are fixed for the length of that turn. At the end of the entire turn, after the 4th activation round, if a card has been bought, then move the cards downwards and replenish from the deck. Some cards are more powerful than others and have their values adjusted by a number at the bottom. For example, this one has +1 event point, and therefore, although it's in events in the slot 2, it would cost 3 event points to purchase. And this one here in slot 3 has a -1 modifier and therefore would cost 2. The minimum cost of a card is always 1. There is no maximum. Event cards can be purchased as part of your activation and used immediately. Some cards can be held in your hand until required. Others are played immediately, while some remain in play throughout the game, to be held all the time that the chariot isn't destroyed, i.e. not in the pit stops. Once cards have been used, they are discarded and cannot be used again in the game. Alternatively, you can exchange 3 event points for a single favour point. An alternative to buying event cards with event points is to exchange them. You can exchange 3 event points for a single favour. If you didn't want to purchase favour, you can save up and use multiple event points during your turn. This could be buying a card and exchanging for a favour, all in the same turn. In order to generate event points, you need to do some fairly outstanding stuff. Firstly, you can perform a successful attack. If you do, you'll gain 2 event points. Remember, that's a successful attack. If you don't hit them, you don't get the points. However, if you use a shield action and your opponent attempts to attack you, whether that shield is successful or not, you gain 2 event points. Note, this isn't just the use of a shield activation. You do actually need to be attacked as well, but it's whether you make the roll or not. You still get the 2 event points. Lastly, you'll get 1 event point for each section or each space in lane 1 on a corner section. There are 4 spaces to 1 corner in lane 1. If you were to spend the entirety in that lane, good luck, you would also gain 4 event points. If you chickened out on the corner and only did 2 spaces in lane 1, you would gain 2 or 3, or indeed just 1, depending on how far you wanted to push your luck. As stated prior, event points can and often do build up and can be exchanged at any point in your turn. And that's how you play the game. I hope you found this useful. Civis Vale. Farewell, citizens.